All right, guys. Apparently we're live right now, so glad to know that. So anyway, Chris Lopez here, and we are doing our second virtual happy hour. This is something that we had the idea of a few weeks ago to start, actually a couple months ago to start. Obviously with COVID, we all like to network. We all like to hang out. It's been a little bit harder with COVID. So Terrance, Doyle and I had the idea a few weeks ago to sit down, bring in a different guest every time. And two things: have the excuse to have a drink or two.
Have some whiskey.
And then also just get to talk with someone with really no agenda, but pick their brain, go off topic, talk market, and just have some fun. So Terrance, who do you rope into for this month?
Yeah, he just flew in a couple hours ago, fresh off the plane from Minneapolis. He's been jet setting the last couple months. Call him a good friend. We met a couple years ago. I've been super impressed by him. Steven Pesavento. A little background. He has been in the real estate game for a little while, flipped a couple hundred homes, and has been on the Bigger Pockets podcast, hosts his own podcast now. One of my favorite real estate podcasts, and I'm not just saying that because you're sitting 6 feet away from me. But no, genuinely, you have some great guests, really thoughtful questions, some awesome content. And yeah, Steven is here in the studio. Steve, what's on your mind today? What are you thinking? You just got back from Hawaii. You just went through a cleanse and you're going through a new diet.
Man, life's changing all around us. It's like people's businesses are changing. People are getting divorced. They're breaking up. They're moving. They're selling their house. I'm grateful. I sold my house back in July, sold for $25,000 above ask. And frankly, I think I sold for more than I was expecting to sell for. So, real estate's in an interesting place right now. But, I'm excited to be back in Denver. Just finished up a short little couple-month trip living in Hawaii. Back visiting family for a little bit back in Minnesota, but winter's coming, baby, and I got to get out of the Midwest. Got to get back here and set up some roots back here home.
Well, before we jump into more, I got my notes here. We have to cheers. Cheers. Cheers to
the Denver real estate market being hot. That's good.
So I learned from a previous show I was recording to take a sip, pause for a second or two. Otherwise, I just cough and don't look nearly as cool.
Yeah.
That's what I'm doing now because
you want to enjoy it. If you're gonna be drinking good quality whiskey, you want to enjoy it. You don't want to just take shots of this.
So
not
enjoy it like I have a fancy plastic cup.
Yeah, exactly.
Classy.
Maybe the next round, you guys are going to want to get some highball glasses and really step things up.
Yeah, the more I drink, the less classy I get. It's not work that way. Anyway, so. I don't know where do you want to start here, but we just had a very interesting brainstorming session before this. I don't know if you want to start there. Yeah.
One of the things I'm interested in, because Steve has more of a national audience and is connecting with operators and really interesting people all around the country is, what do you see? I know we see Denver. Chris and I see the Denver real estate market. What are you seeing around the country, since March and April? We had a pandemic. People were really worried. We have an election coming up. What kinds of trends or things are you seeing out there right now?
Yeah, I mean, since April in particularly, it just depends on what day of the week you're talking about because everything has changed so much month to month and week to week. But, overall, what I've noticed is that people were in a lot of fear in April and May, a lot of uncertainty, a lot of feeling that there was going to be some huge deals in the multifamily space, some big deals in commercial space. But overall, we really haven't seen big price drops as far as when we're talking about multifamily real estate or specifically, any kind of investment real estate. Things continue to grow. I think that's in part because low interest rates and we're actually seeing, fairly typical collections.
Right.
And it's probably because, the government put in, $5.2 trillion, including all the liquidity that they've created in the market, which, essentially props up or creates a backstop for investors and therefore the rest of the economy to feel really comfortable. But, a lot of the conversation, a lot of the talk is that depending on the asset class and depending on the market, that things are going to continue to be strong. Now, some markets, are in a bad place and will continue to be, some of the places where there's a lot of hospitality. But what we're seeing in especially here in Denver, is that there's still growth happening. And part of that growth is because people are moving from some of those big cities. Now, my own hypothesis, my hallucination, or my guess is that I think cities like LA and New York are still going to be great places for people to invest, in the coming years. So I wouldn't poo-poo all big cities personally. Now, some people definitely are. But there's definitely a lot of move for people to move from these cities to places where they have a little bit more space. They can get outside and
Right.
they can have better quality of living, especially because so many more people are working remotely from home.
Yeah.
So I want to, because it's interesting
Well
you
said.
mentioned LA, San Francisco, New York. Do you think, I agree, I think they will definitely rebound. They're not falling off the face of the planet or anything, but do you think in terms of like their, in the 100, 200, 300 year point of view things, have they peaked? And I'm talking about like peak there, then when you actually kind of take it more to nominal dollars, just for inflation, like, hey, 5 years down the road, 10 years down the road, was this past 10, 20 years, was that the peak of their return for investing and just peak, hey, number of people there for business reasons?
Yeah. It's hard to say for sure. And I'm definitely not the person to be making those calls. But if I had to make a guess, if some of the really smart people that I'm listening to and, some of the people that Marcus and Millichamp's bringing out are talking about the fact that, people are moving out of the city right now and they're moving to markets like Austin, like Denver, and that people are going to continue to move to those places. But that once we have a shift back to this virus being under control and we have some, changes to our society in general that allow people to shift back into the cities, that from what I've been told that back, in 9/11 time, people were talking about never working in big tall office buildings again. Obviously that changed and that went back. So I would imagine that people are still going to have a drive to live in those big cities. But we've already seen a huge push for especially the younger generation to have an opportunity, millennials in particular, have an opportunity to live life where they want, in places they can afford, closer to the city center, and frankly, in markets where they can have better affordability in comparison with the type of work they're doing and the lifestyle that they live. And that's why markets like Raleigh and so many others are continuing to grow and probably are expected to grow in the future, is because people are leaving these big cities. But I don't think that's going to mean the big cities aren't going to be around anymore. I think they're still going to play a huge role because, people still like to work face to face. Like what we just had today, we had a phenomenal working session, brainstorming, working on some really cool projects together. But the interaction that we had in person, you can't really recreate remotely. I've been working remotely for, 3, probably 4 or 5 years now, and explicitly remotely in Denver for the last 3 years. And I get out and I have a lot of fun and I connect with other people, but it can be a little bit of a difficult time socially when you're working remotely. And a lot of workers that are stuck working remotely right now are saying that. And a lot of the conversations that are coming out after people are completing some of these surveys are saying that over 70% of the workforce wants to be working from an office majority of the time. So I think once the opportunity to work from an office is available again, I think most people are going to end up going back there. And therefore that would make me argue that some of these big cities or downtown areas are going to continue to revitalize.
So Chris and I both have children under the age of 3, and I'll just say, I can't work from home. As soon as you can go into an office and you have children, you are running to the office because productivity, the chaos. I mean, obviously it's amazing being around your children, but if you want to get deep work done and really solve problems, it's virtually impossible at home. Even and I have an office at the house, but it's like, it doesn't even matter if the door's locked or if I put pillows everywhere and try and the kids are getting in.
You hear them screaming.
Yeah,
you walk
they don't
out
care
to the
what
kitchen.
kind of problem I'm working on.
It's a 20-minute trip.
Yeah, it's So I tend to agree. Office may be down right now. It's down a lot in New York, probably down a lot in LA and Seattle, but it's going to be a momentary time. But they just have the infrastructure that they have built there, in those cities for big companies, big data. It's not like it's going to move to the Midwest tomorrow. Although I will say that owning properties in the Midwest, it was interesting to see that during April, May, June, and July, the Midwest paid and collected more rent on average by like 10% than the coastal cities. So that says a lot, I think, about the kind of tenants. I think the lower cost of living. So to your point, I think now that millennials can pick where they want to live and work, I think they're going to the Midwest. It's a lot more cost effective, right? You can rent, our average rental there is $750 versus in Denver, it's like double that, and you may not have, but there is no sports teams right now, and there is no like shows. I mean, there's the things that the reasons why people want to live in the big cities, you can't really do, you can't take advantage of, amusement parks aren't open besides the outdoors, which is why I think Denver's been, a popular destination. But I don't know. tend to agree. I think in a year or two, people are going to be right back in LA and New York, and it's going to be, business as usual.
I think it opens up like an opportunity for investors who previously would have never considered investing in those markets because they were priced out or because they were too competitive. But I think, as you see people kind of flying away from a place, that actually can create an opportunity for you to fly in and figure out, hey, how can I serve that niche? So, I'm not going to start investing in LA and New York myself personally. It's not my niche. It's not my focus, but I would definitely look to work with operators that are focused on that area. And I could see that being a pretty good thesis of why there's actually a value add opportunity because people have flocked away from it.
Yeah, that's well said. So I know so changing lanes a little bit. So you were in Hawaii for 6 to 8 weeks. I've been seeing, Hawaii seems like the popular place. You're a real estate investor. I see all these pictures and videos from all these, these masterminds and groups in Hawaii. Looks like they're just living the life. So what was that like? Who are you down there with? And give us the takeaway of being down there. And is that a place you could see yourself spending more time?
Yeah, so Hawaii is amazing. The Cliff Notes version is that I sold the house and I knew that there was an opportunity specifically to go and travel and stay somewhere else. And I was kind of in this rush of having a bunch of big deals closing, raising capital for those, and wanting, moving out of my house. So I was like, okay, well, now's the perfect time. If I'm going to have to put things in storage, even for a week while moving into the next apartment, why not go somewhere cool? And so we were looking all over the country. But what was cool about Hawaii in particular is because of the same reason why people won't travel to Hawaii or have not been traveling to Hawaii was exactly the reason why it created an opportunity for us to go there. And it's because they had a 14-day quarantine period, which means you had to stay on the property or in your hotel for 14 days. And on majority of the islands, it's actually you have to stay in the hotel unless you state while entering that you have an intention to potentially relocate to Hawaii. So, of course, we were intending to relocate there temporarily. We made that choice that we were going to do that. And as a result, we had actually found a place that was $100,000 a month normally. And this person normally got that every single month, renting out this place on Maui. And we had it negotiated for $8,500 a month. It's a 5-bedroom mansion with a hot tub and pool right on the ocean. So it was amazing. 3 days before the trip, though, the Hawaiian government changed the rules. So what did we do? We didn't cancel the trip. We just essentially had to change what we were doing. So they changed the rules into Maui, and that ended up creating an opportunity for us to actually go to Big Island. So we ended up renting a 5-bedroom estate, 10 acres on the Big Island, and it was amazing. It was like the perfect little getaway, working vacation. But I think the big takeaway for everyone who's listening is like when everyone's saying, I'm not going to go there for this reason, or I'm not going to invest in this city, or I'm not going to do that because of X. Ask yourself, well, hey, how can that actually be my opportunity? Because as a result, we were able to go and stay in this mansion that was the former Beach Boys estate for, a fraction of the cost. And, staying on a 10-acre estate for 14 days with a pool and a tennis court and fruit trees galore and amazing views. Like, I would trade that for my little house in Denver any day for a couple of weeks. But as far as moving to Hawaii, definitely not going to move there permanently, maybe on Maui or something like that. But the pace of things are just too slow for where I'm at in my life and career.
So it was normally $100,000 a month. You guys got it for $8,500?
$8,500, and
wow.
It was normally $100,000 a month.
Wow. Just because no one was going to Hawaii during
because
April,
nobody could literally get into Hawaii. And in Maui in particular, the only way for us to get that property, which was the original property, not the one we stayed in, the only way we could get it was if we signed a lease saying we were going to stay for 6 months. But then the owner also was going to write us a lease that would allow us to leave early. So we could cancel at our discretion. So what that ended up creating was we were willing to play ball and we were willing to stay, but unfortunately they changed the rules 3 days before and they canceled on us because of that. And so we ended up having to find another place, and that place was amazing. But, a 14-day quarantine, I had tons of friends all working remotely, and I kept, trying to get other people to get out there with us. I had a couple really close friends, entrepreneurs who worked remotely, and tons of people were like, oh, I don't want to be there for 14 days. That's too, I don't want to be at the property. Everyone's making excuses. But then when they look back and they see like, holy smokes, you went and lived in a place cheaper than you'd pay rent in your home city to live in, essentially a mansion. I don't know. I would definitely do it again, but I'm excited to be back in Denver and looking forward. Hopefully the ski hills stay open.
Yeah, it sounds like snow's coming. Well, that's amazing. That sounds incredible, and I'm jealous. I wish I could take a 14-day quarantine trip to Maui.
I wish we were doing the virtual happy hour over there instead.
Yeah, I wish there was like the ocean like right behind that screen. That'd be quite the backdrop.
Oh, I would take the mountains any over the oceans.
We can debate that on another podcast.
I do want to ask you this question. Just talking what we were talking earlier about, just going across, the big cities out there. I know one of your passions and your podcast is all about the mindset and the mindset for success. Have you seen? It's gonna be like a loaded question. I'm not sure the best way to ask, but have you seen any shifts in mindset, or have you seen certain traits of mindsets do particularly well during the COVID pandemic?
Yeah, I mean, at the end of the day, the mindset, having a growth mindset, which everyone hears about growth mindset. Oh, you want to have a growth mindset over a fixed mindset. Well, what does that mean? Well, growth mindset means that you're focused on having the ability to improve your traits or qualities. A fixed mindset means you are the way you are and you can improve. You're either good or bad. Someone's either good or bad. They're either the right fit or they're not the right fit. Right. And so when you have that fixed mindset, there's nowhere that you can go. You're either a success or you're a failure. But when you have the growth mindset, you're able to look at things from a perspective of I'm going to continue growing. And so, after interviewing hundreds of people on the investor mindset, talking to some of the most successful people from, Chris Voss to Brandon Turner to the author of The One Thing, and everyone in between, what I've noticed is that consistently those people are thinking from a perspective of how can I continually grow? The other thing that they're doing is they're continually looking at how are other successful people thinking, and they're taking those ways of thinking, those beliefs or those strategies, and they're applying them directly within their own life and their own business. And what results from that is they start to see some of those same results that those successful people saw in their business. And so the more people you talk to that are winning per se, in society's mind, they tend to think along some of those same lines, even if they don't realize that they're doing it. Even if they're not conscious to it or they're not on the old I'm improving personal improvement path, a lot of those people are taking that way of thinking, and that's what they're actually manifesting in the world.
That's a great question. So when you and I met a couple years ago, we had a really good talk about multifamily, and we were talking about applying some of your strategies from single family that you were doing virtually to multifamily, and we were brainstorming, and then you ended up starting a podcast, for those of you that don't know, called the Investor Mindset Podcast. So walk me through what that transition looked like from flipping properties to starting a podcast, and maybe one of the big takeaways that you've had from starting it and having a ton of success. I mean, I think early on, within your first 3 or 4 months, it was one of the top ranked real estate investing podcasts. You've had a bunch of downloads, hundreds of thousands, and you've been ranked in the top, one of the top real estate podcasts, I think, consistently. So walk me through that transition of wanting to get into multifamily, trying to figure out the best way in. You launched the podcast. You were talking today, over 700,000 podcasts, and you decide to start one. I mean, to me, that was pretty impressive and something that probably would have intimidated me, but it didn't intimidate you, and you've gone on to have a ton of success. Walk me through that.
Yeah. So I think for me, what it was I, just like everyone who's listening, you're listening to podcasts and maybe you've had that thought to yourself, like, hey, I would love to be able to do that. I'd love to be able to be on the other side, interviewing, connecting, asking questions to all these people that I look up to. And I had wanted to do it, but I had that limiting belief. I had this belief that kept telling me, oh, I don't have enough skill. I don't have enough background. I don't have enough credibility. I can't do that. And if, the only regret that I have is that I didn't start earlier. And that's from real estate. That's from the podcast perspective. That's usually a consistent theme that people say when they look back and recommend doing something. But what podcasting did for me was it gave me an ability not only to do something that I'm really good at, communicating and interacting and asking questions because I have a genuine curiosity, but to be able to publicly speak and build credibility out in this community, both from a passive investor perspective, bringing people in who have the opportunity to invest with me and VonFinch Capital and the type of deals that we do and the type of deals we put together, but also from the active investor, people who want to follow in the same footsteps. And so what it was for me was just like so many other things, I had made the decision that I was going to do it. I got to the point where I was at threshold. I decided I was going to do a podcast. I committed to doing it. And then I went and found other people who were succeeding at it. And funny thing, after I talked to some of those people, I realized that they're just normal people like you and me. Now, some of them are succeeding at a crazy high level, and some of them are doing some really incredible things. But by talking to them, I realized like, oh, wow, if they can do it, I can do it. It's a common theme you'll hear if you listen to the podcast or if you heard me speak before, because I've had that moment a few times. It's usually the moment that people end up taking action and doing the things they want to go after. And so for me, I was flipping houses, and I, just a little track record background. We'd flipped, over 200 houses, flipped or wholesaled in about a 2.5-year period in 2 different states. While I lived in California and Denver, was investing in North Carolina and Minneapolis. And, about half of those were full-blown flips or new builds or, some kind of development. And what I learned through that process was I took action, and we were really, really good at getting deals, and I was really good at raising capital. But what I didn't love as much was the operations side. I had a great partner who was focused on operation, but when he ended up having a big exit on a big development opportunity and said, hey, I don't want to flip houses anymore. I just made a ton of money, and I'm going to sit back and, kind of collect the easy money. I said, well, great. Well, what direction do I want to go? And I started looking around and realized the big opportunity that's available in commercial real estate. And it's, for a couple reasons, the way it's valued, based on income versus based on other comparables in the market, but also from a scalability standpoint, because I'd already started buying single family properties at scale. When you're, buying, 75 houses a year, you end up having a pretty good ability to buy houses, but, we weren't able to get the kind of numbers. And so what I realized was that because I was loving the podcast was filling me up. And I also saw this other ability to be able to communicate big ideas very succinctly. And I was great at marketing, and I had great connections and the ability to do due diligence. I was able to bring those things together to add significant value to my investors. So the people who already had trusted me before, now I was able to go out and essentially build a business around those skill sets. And most importantly, focus on my ideal customer. And here's something that people often forget about in business. And we were talking about this today when we were talking about some of these cool projects that we got. Won't talk about it here. We'll have to, you guys have to keep listening to more episodes as more of that will come out. But when we start thinking about who's the ideal customer, who's that ideal person that you want to serve every single day, I realized in my single family business that at the time, my current customer was people who were going through significant challenge in their life. They were not growth minded. They were looking for a one-time sale, and it was not repeatable. And I was buying their house at 60 to 70 cents on the dollar. Great service, great value to them, great value to my investors, but it wasn't the kind of business I wanted to build. And by getting really clear, and by this process of taking action, starting the podcast, then going out and doing these other things, I was able to realize, like, how can I actually build a business around serving growth-minded people who are already successful and want to be more successful? And that's what lights me up. And so that's what the podcast did. It helped me clarify that and then create a specific area, a specific niche for me to be able to excel at. And that's like the coolest thing is when you interview all these people, you realize like, oh, I actually really like doing this. I want to do more of it.
That's a phenomenal answer. I'm still trying to digest that. That was a lot of good stuff.
I was throwing a lot at
really
you. We've got a couple
I gotta
different.
take that in
So you gotta remember, one of our notes we learned is we got to pause a few seconds after the question so us and we can digest it. So it's a good thing.
Digest that.
I got a question if you're still digesting.
Yeah. Shoot.
So yes to the question. All right. This is. Something we talked about here. You scaled your business remotely. How have you done that? Because I always think it's always good to scale, but also now since everyone's virtual or mostly virtual, scaling is a very different thing. And it's interesting how you said the last number of years you've been working remotely. In my graduate college up to about 6 years ago, I was pretty much 100% remote. Yeah. And I was doing that back like 2002 to 2010. So before, everyone had Zoom calls and all that, we were still using like Vonage, if you guys know what that is. It was like seriously Vonage and AOL Instant Messenger for a few years. And I liked it to a bit, learned a lot, but two things I learned was that like the things I learned from scaling remotely just helped me scale locally, I think, so much better. Because, remotely you have to have such key systems in place. For sure. And if you can do that remotely, a lot of times you can be lazy on the systems because we're sitting across a conference table from each other. So I found that very beneficial. But I'm curious, as you've done it, like, what are your key takeaways? Because you've built, your couple businesses, you're transitioning, you're growing. Like, what have you learned, and what tips can you give people out there for just continuing to scale or get better at scaling during this time of opportunity and time of working remotely?
Yeah, so I think the biggest tips on scaling I can share from the failures, right? When you scale to do 200 deals, you scale 75 deals in your first year, and you're going direct to seller, and you're spending a lot of money on marketing, you're spending a lot of money on team. It's really, really important that you're running a well-oiled machine. And at the beginning of that process, we were not. We were spending money, we were hiring people, we were learning as we go, and frankly, that's sometimes what you have to do. But that's one of the reasons why it's so important for me now to be investing specifically by curating deals with experienced operators who already learned all those mistakes well before I put money in their deals. Because within about a year and a half, 2-year period, I'd spent about $1 million on marketing, right? $1 million on direct to seller marketing in under 2 years. And as a result of that, we had some phenomenal return on investment in some channels, and we had some horrific return on investment in other channels. And here's the big kicker.
That's about $50,000 a month for 2 years.
Yeah. It was more than that in some months because we scaled up, but huge. And as a result of that, what I learned was just how important it is to be tracking those numbers every single day. And if you're not good at it, then you better make sure that you've got someone on your team who's really, really good at parsing through that data and is making some of those decisions on their own to cut marketing spend in certain areas. Like, here's a perfect example. Pay-per-click for a long time was producing, for $3,000 spent, we'd make 15 to 20 grand. So it was a pretty great ROI. But there was about a 6 to 7 month period where it started to slowly go down, and we were not watching that ROI calculation as closely. And so what happened is we were still spending 20, 25 grand a month on pay-per-click, and we weren't getting the ROI. And so by the end of that period, by the end of, when we finally shut it off, when we had done the ROI calculation, which I've learned should be done weekly, if not more often, and definitely monthly, because the more times that you have measurement opportunities, the more times you have an opportunity to change. We had essentially lost all of our profit from that channel. That channel ended up being a net neutral after being one of our best channels. And so that is true across pretty much every channel that you can have out there, from cold calling to direct mail to pay-per-click.
And was this Google PPC?
Google PPC.
Okay.
And we were doing a little bit of Facebook, and Facebook wasn't consistent. It was inconsistent at the time. People have definitely cracked the nut on that, and people are still throwing money into the garbage in all of those channels. But if you're not tracking specifically what's working where, and if you're doing direct mail, what's working in what zip code, in what type of homeowner, getting really granular when you're doing 150,000 mailers a month or 100,000 mailers a month, like, you can really throw away money really quickly. So what was the takeaway from that? Well, the takeaway was, scaling for the sake of scale is not actually valuable. The other big takeaway is that we were quite profitable overall, but we could have been much, much more profitable had we been running tighter operations. And so that's the biggest thing on scale, is I actually think you want to scale up enough so you have enough data to work with, but you need to make sure that you or your team as a whole has the skill set to be able to not only put processes into place, but to keep them in place running well. And the only way you can do that is by having metrics and KPIs to be able to measure and manage.
Can I peel back this onion some more? Because this is really, I really like to talk marketing and also just the scaling of things. So would you define, I agree with you, have to have track it, and people are either good at it or they're not good. There's usually not much middle ground, I feel like.
Yeah.
Are you really good at it, or do you hire someone to track and put the reports in place together for you?
So I am really, really good at vision and getting people to be on top of my vision and to see the vision, and really good at building relationships and coaching and managing people from a person to person standpoint. I'm great at sales, but I am not good at numbers. I can do underwriting, and I underwrite all my own deals, and I dive into those, but I always have somebody on my team who's able to do that underwriting, or in this case, who's able to do essentially the analytics to be able to understand what works. And so we brought in a third-party analyst who essentially came in and started parsing through those numbers, and that's how we started understanding where things actually were. We made some big changes, and those changes were really, really beneficial, but we made them, I would have liked to have made them much earlier. And that's the biggest takeaway I want people to have.
And so like looking at reports weekly, I mean, that, you have to be on top of your data collection. So we're using a specific software, or are you all like Google spreadsheets or Excel spreadsheets? Because I've always had difficulty with all these channels. It's how do you combine the data into one platform that's also very useful?
I think that's the hard part about, especially when you're a single family operator and you're going direct to seller marketing, is that there's not really a CRM that allows you to track this information in a very, very effective way consistently. Now, at the time we were using Podio, and Podio is pretty popular, where you can layer different kind of tools on top of it. But frankly, I think it sucks as far as being able to manage. I can say it very clearly and openly that it sucks for being able to manage team members and be able to manage metrics, because you're not able to get a deep view without manually pulling this information. So the result of how we ended up managing it was that we had to manually pull the info. So it made it difficult to be able to do weekly reporting because it was such a cumbersome process.
Yeah.
So for those big organizations, when you're just a small operator, it makes it cost prohibitive to manage it weekly, but you've got to put pieces in place from the very beginning to be able to manage, well, what is working and what's not.
And now with your current business, have you fully transitioned out of the single family flipping?
Yeah, we don't do any flips. We haven't done flips. We haven't done a flip. We sold our last one earlier this year. We still do a wholesale property here and there because we still have some stuff coming in, but we've fully transitioned over.
Okay. So now if you're a new business, how often are you reviewing the analytics and all that? Are you on that weekly now, or what are you doing?
So we still need to be definitely doing it more often because I learned from that mistake. But the deal is right now we're doing monthly reviews on those on the numbers. But what's interesting about our business as we're growing into this space is that the channels that we're working from are not as cost. We're not spending 50, 60 grand a month on marketing. Most of it's earned marketing. So I'm able to tell, well, what's working and where is it working.
What's defined earned marketing?
Earned marketing is where you're putting out a podcast, or you're putting out social media, or you're working a network, or your network specifically, versus I would call paid marketing, like I'm going to do pay-per-click ads, or I'm going to do Facebook ads, or I'm going to do direct mail, or different things like that.
So how do you track the metrics on the podcast? I mean, because those are, from everything I've done, podcasting metrics are about the worst in the world by like tenfold compared to Google, Facebook, YouTube, anything else out there. It's about the worst thing in the world. How are you tracking, especially since you're so relationship focused?
Yeah.
You can't say, hey, one podcast leads to one motivated seller lead.
Yeah. Yeah, so I don't have a good. We haven't cracked that nut specifically, but we're definitely getting closer to it.
Okay.
But the way that we do that now is that we track the overall downloads and listen rate on episode or on a podcast, and then we look at what the calls to action are that are happening within that podcast, or that the different calls to action that we have. And a call to action for those non-marketing people is where I say, hey, if you want this thing for free, or you want this thing that's paid, go do this action or go do this thing. So an example of that is we have this 52-page passive investing guide. It's, super detailed, super in depth. And for the people who are interested in passive investing and are looking at investing in syndications, and they're looking at figuring out how they can grow their wealth, whether they're working a W-2 or they're making a ton of money in their business, they'll go to theinvestormindset.com/passive. They'll put their information in, and then I'll be able to tell, okay, well, I can see that a lead came in from that source. Now, the thing that we're missing is we're not being able to tell exactly whether that lead came from this episode or that episode.
Okay, that's my next question.
Or whether or not it came from, me mentioning it on this podcast, which I highly encourage you to go check that out, theinvestormindset.com/passive. If you're interested in passive investing, great 7-day email series that we do, kind of teaching and training on some of that stuff. So we're not able to track that, but one way that you can track that we've considered, but it's one of those things where it takes more work than it's worth for the level that we're at, is that you can use different links in different places. You can put bit.ly links. You can track through what the click-through rate is on these different things. Now, for me, what's most important, if I was going to call metrics that matter to me, overall listens or reach, across different platforms from Facebook to YouTube to the podcast to LinkedIn, overall reach across all those, and then breaking that down and how many people subscribe to the Investor Mindset newsletter list, how many people opt in specifically for passive investing, how many people opt in specifically for real estate entrepreneurship coaching or multifamily entrepreneurship coaching with a partnership that we have. So I'd be looking as we work down the funnel, and a funnel is just a way of looking at how people come from having no idea who you are down to taking a specific action within your business. Each of those gets smaller and smaller. And if we're able to track as we go down that path, we're able to see, okay, I'm getting these many listens and that's turning into these leads. Now, I would love to get more specific, but unfortunately, the juice isn't worth the squeeze until we step up our game to being on a much higher level. And like I said, being a top 200 investing podcast, it's still not at the level where it makes sense to get that granular. At least it hasn't for us yet.
And I think that's an important point. Is there's always better, then there's also the good enough. Because extra tracking, it's like, cool, I can spend extra 20 man hours a week doing this to optimize an extra $50 a month, $100 a month, or $1,000 a month. Not worth it.
For sure.
So we've got about 10 minutes left on here before we have to wrap up. I could talk marketing until everyone else went to sleep with you, Steven. So Terrance, you probably got some more real estate questions.
I've digested his previous.
Did you? Are you back up to speed now?
I'm back in the game.
We'll have to come back to marketing. We'll have a special episode. Me and
I would
Chris
just say,
on
I feel like
marketing.
I'm getting a master's in education on marketing, just seeing two marketing gurus go back and forth. So it's fascinating stuff. I hope that people that are into marketing can go back and watch this, because you guys are both two of the best. This is why I wanted to work with both of you. I think you guys are two of the best at what you do.
But I want to point something out to the listeners too. So the conversation that we just had, if things were going over your head, phenomenal. If you understood some of what we were talking about, really, really great. If you understood none of it, you're going to want to start at, the beginning and listen to it again. But the process of listening to how we're thinking about doing what we're doing, the process of listening to what I've said about how I've learned from this and how I'm applying it and how you can go essentially do that yourself by taking the way that we're thinking about this and applying it in your business. So I want to make sure that everyone who's listening that is a real estate operator or passive investor, whatever you guys do, that you are at least listening with the intent to not only learn and be entertained, but how can you apply this directly?
Yeah.
No, 100%.
Actually, I want one follow-up question on here, just because, you've grown your business very differently. A lot of it just through, you're an amazing networker, Terrance. What type of metrics do you track? Often do you track? And you're going through like a crazy growth mode now. Like, I know the people you're hiring and the way your business is scaling. Like, what's your tracking like, if you don't mind sharing?
I'm much more of a real estate, I would say, with all due respect, and you guys have done great things in real estate. I'm much more like in the weeds on like looking at property. I probably walk a property every day or every other day. So I'm looking at real estate. I'm on job sites. I'm meeting with brokers, meeting with bankers. I mean, I'm definitely in the real estate weeds, where you guys do a lot of real estate deals and transactions as a periphery to doing excellent at your core thing, which is marketing. You guys know how to get attention in different ways. And so that's what I love about what you guys each do. I think the thing for me is I know that I get a great return on my time when I spend time with really talented people, whether that be people that have done really well in their own business and they're looking to get into real estate, or brokers that are really good at knowing who is motivated in Denver or Des Moines, or a GC or contractors that are looking for more consistent work, or they want someone that's going to pay them, more consistently, or things like that. So that's what I track is, I know that I've kind of over time through being in different businesses that when I spend quality time with someone, that I'm going to get a disproportionate return. And if I'm comparing Instagram, LinkedIn, and Twitter and YouTube, I couldn't tell you, other than they all work. And I think it's just a big snowball that we've been able to get momentum on, and that we've created, a lot of opportunity over the last couple of years. And since I met you, my big thing, I reached out to you was, hey, I really want to get better at marketing. And I couldn't tell you which social media network has had a better ROI, but I can just tell you that it's all worked. And, I just focus on building relationships, and it's been, I think, a positive net return. I'm not spending $50,000 a month. That's a much different. If I was doing that, then I'd be much more in the weeds on what the return is on different social media platforms. But
because you're a great operator and you automatically would be focused on how do I make sure I squeeze as much out of that.
Right.
Like for me, I am, there's a reason that I'm focused. My whole business is built around working with phenomenal operators because I know that I'm really, really good at the things that I'm good at. And I want to focus on being the best at those, those areas. So I think that's like a huge, huge takeaway because networking is absolutely incredibly important. And the bigger and less about the bigger your network, the stronger your network, those deep connections. That's one of the reasons that you've been so successful here in Denver.
Yeah. So one of the questions I have, speaking of operators, is you've been able to interview some super successful people. You don't need to name names, but I'm wondering, coming from another operator's perspective, like what are the one or two things you think that the successful people you've interviewed, specifically in real estate, have in common that you would share with the audience?
It's a good one.
Yeah. So what do those operators have in common? So when I talk to like Joe Fairless and, Reed Goosens and Andrew Campbell and Rod Khalif and, Mark Kenny and all these people who are really, really good at what their part of the multifamily or the real estate piece is that they've figured out where they're the best at. They figured out what their skill set is. They understand that it's all about building a process. At the end of the day, that if you're going to scale anything, you've got to build out that process. You've got to have really tight operations, and that starts all the way from going out and finding deals, from understanding how do you build that deal pipeline. And in commercial multifamily, in the big leagues, it's all about relationships. When you're talking big commercial multifamily, one of the things that was interesting to me coming from single family, buying only one property in my whole life from a realtor, was my personal residence, which is the one I just talked about selling 2 years ago. And I told that broker, who's a good friend of mine, I told him when he said he was going to look for deals, you're not going to find a deal for me. The numbers are not going to work. I don't believe it, because I bought every deal directly from sellers. He ended up finding one, obviously, and it paid quite well when I did sell it 2 years later. But what's interesting about it is that in the commercial space, it's all about building credibility with brokers. Building credibility that you're going to be the person who's going to be able to close on time, that you're going to do what you say, that you can raise the capital if you're a syndicator, that you've got the capital if you're a direct owner. And so that credibility piece plays in huge on the broker side when you're talking about that deal pipeline. The credibility is then extended to the investor side when you're talking about, putting the capital stack together. It's hugely important when you're talking to the bank, and they're going to want to, back you, whether you're talking Fannie Mae or, some other type of financing. But it's incredibly important with investors, because investors invest with me because they know, like, and trust me, because they believe that I'm going to go out and find great operators, and I'm going to do most of the heavy lifting for them to finally do that screening themselves. It's the same reason that they invest with you as well. And so being able to figure out how can they build a really tight operation from a process perspective, but then also build credibility at scale with lots of people and build true relationships with the right people, I think is something that I've noticed. But happy to dive deeper.
No, I thought that was that answered my question. It sounds like you said they know what and we were talking about this earlier, they know what their superpower is. Superpower being, what do they get a disproportionate return on their time? What's the thing that they do that's worth $10,000 an hour? And then they know how to build systems around that, right? And then they have credibility in the market. For sure. What I heard you say that, most of the, operators that are successful, that are ultra successful, that are really well known, that have a great brand around being operators, that's what they've done. And I think that I'm always interested, coming from a sports background, you're always trying to glean, from people senior and more experienced, hey, what do they do that I can take away, that I can apply to my business? So I'm always interested to hear. Do you want to talk about superpowers?
Sure.
Should we talk about super? We had a great.
I got to ask a question here from an audience before you get on there. This is one of the big things is, we're trying to get this more live so people can join us. So James Brown said, "Good combo, guys." Thank you, James. Thanks for joining us live.
What's up, James?
This is a question from Matthew A. He emailed us in about a week ago. And I don't know if you guys know the specifics of this answer, but also I think from the standpoint of like, how do you take this and tackle it, and how would you go about approaching it, since both you guys have built some businesses here. So Matthew A. says, I would like some guidance on how and where to get purchase contracts for wholesale, subject to and or seller financing deals. also need help understanding how to use these different deal structures to make sure everything is done correctly. So I think both of you guys have a lot of experience in this, or at least I know you do, seeing from your stuff. I know you bought a ton of stuff too, Terrance. So like, more so like, how would you go about attacking this problem? Because this is obviously more than a 5-minute thing.
I've done this myself. This comes up maybe once a month for me. I'm like, I don't know how to do this, but I'm going to ask people who know how. So what I would do is reach out to someone that he knows is an established wholesaler and just be upfront and say, hey, I think I have a deal. Can you help me with the contract? Show me how it's supposed to look. And specifically when it's seller financing. And an experienced wholesaler should have that. And they may not even want anything. They may just do it for the fulfillment of knowing they paid it forward and helped someone else. And if they wanted something, I'm guessing it'd be really nominal. But you may gain a lot from just having them walk through it with you the first time, since you are a beginner. So I might even say, this is something I've done back in the single family days of saying, hey, what if we split this 50-50 or 75-25 or whatever's appropriate? But why don't you show me how you would do this deal? I got the buyer. I have all these things. It's great terms, a great deal. Can you walk through this with me? If you don't know a wholesaler, then I would go to Bigger Pockets, say I'm looking for an experienced wholesaler in this market, or I'd go to Facebook and post it, and you'll probably get some phenomenal responses, and then you just have to pick the right one.
And what happens if you don't get a response?
If you post that on Bigger Pockets, you'll definitely get a response. If you go in the forum marketplace and just say, hey, I have a deal off market, looking to partner with an existing wholesaler, and that's the way I would do it. I'm interested to hear.
For sure, because the underlying what you're talking about there is you're talking about, hey, how can I add value to this other wholesaler's world, or other real estate investors? So I mean, think about like if you're going to buy the property and you're going to sell it, then you're going to think who is going to be the end buyer. Now, if you don't know anything, you're probably going to end up being in a position where they're going to make more money by buying that from you than they would if you were to sell it on the open market. But that's fine because you're essentially trying to learn by doing it for free. If you were looking for specific advice about, the step-by-step process, how to do that, then, I couldn't see a better way other than getting a coach. Because the difference between getting a coach or a mentor is you can go and get free advice, and it's definitely the way that I built my career. But one of the things that's really nice about having direct mentorship, somebody, if this is the business that you're going to build and this is what you're focused on, then it might make sense for you to invest in somebody who's already done it. From a mentorship perspective, that's the difference. Mentor, somebody who's already done it and is doing it. A coach is somebody who understands how to do it, and most importantly, understands how that they can get you to take the action to do the thing that you want to do. Coaches don't necessarily have to be the best. You think the difference between, LeBron James and his coach, it's a big difference. They couldn't switch roles. It wouldn't be very good for them to switch roles, but they're very, very good at what they do. But when you're in that position, you focus on, hey, how can I get really clear? Because, essentially what you're going to do with that seller in this situation is you're going to ask them questions about what do they really want? What's valuable to them? And you're going to put it in terms that is going to be valuable to them on the backside. If you're going to try to get a seller finance deal together, someone's not going to do a seller finance deal just because you come in and say, hey, I actually want to buy the property and I want to buy it seller finance. They don't even know what that is. But if you put it into terms that's beneficial for them, hey, I want to buy the property and I actually want to pay more than I normally would pay for the property. I'd actually like to be able to write you a check for about $20,000 more. But, instead of paying the normal $150 that I could pay, I can pay $170. But, actually as a bonus of it, you're not going to have to pay taxes on it right away, all at once. And it's called a deferred sale. So, as a result of that, you're going to get payments every single month, just the same as if you were renting it, but you don't have to deal with any of the headache, or if the market shifts, you're in a good position because I'm the one who's responsible for doing everything, and I'm the one who's going to be paying you. So, it's a really simple process. I can actually pay you more, but if you want to go the other route, I can definitely, write you a check today or tomorrow for, $150,000. And as a result of that, the people have the option to go that route, and you open up their mind because they are thinking about it from the perspective of what's beneficial to them.
That was phrased super well.
I was about to
say, that whoever is listening that wants to get into wholesale and rewinds that, because that was phrased. I want to sell my house for 170 to Steve right now, and I'll do seller financing. I'll take the deal.
Yeah.
But I think that's so good because so many people, they forget about, like, they don't practice before they go play. Right. Whether where I know we've all played sports here, you don't bring your A game with zero practice. you're not going to practice at level 0 and play better. At best, I think you can play as best as you practice. And obviously you have practiced that, which means you probably wrote out a script. You probably record yourself with your iPhone and watched yourself and listened to yourself. Like, that's what I've done over the years too. Like, they came across so naturally, but I'm guessing you have said that before 2 minutes ago, right? Maybe a couple thousand times.
I haven't said it for probably 10 months. Maybe,
but that's the thing. They came off so good.
But the deal is, because I practiced it so many times, because I wrote the script out, I practiced the script in front of the mirror, and it's what I tell all my clients. I have a few clients I work with on the same stuff because of what I've been able to scale, kind of pointing them in the right direction. But for example, I was talking to one of my clients, and he was like, "Yeah, I'm having this challenge right now where I'm getting really caught up when I'm talking to sellers in person. I'm not confident. I feel like I need to be able to address some of the problems that they're dealing with, better. And they're coming up with these objections, and I don't know how to handle it." And it's like, well, what was the objection? Okay, well, what can you do? What can you write down specifically that would be a response to that objection that you feel comfortable saying? And if every single time you're having that interaction, you are able to go and go back to that practice response, it starts to come out really, really smoothly. And so the way that you really want it to be, if you're going to be a wholesaler or real estate developer or investor, anyone who's doing sales or interacting in that way, you want to be able to speak smoothly as if you've said it a million times, because it's going to come out confident. And so you don't want to be going in there trying to shoot from the hip the first time you ever shot a 3 throw. You don't want it to be in the big game. You want it to be, in practice for months and months and months before you actually get out there. And that doesn't mean you're not playing in real games and practicing this stuff in the field, but you've got to put in the time. You can't just expect to show up. And that goes back to, I think we were talking about the growth mindset earlier, is that if you have the mindset of, I can get better, and therefore I'm going to practice every day and I'm going to get better, you're going to have a better chance of succeeding than, I'm not good today, and therefore I'm a failure and I'm not going to be good at this. You can't move past a fixed mindset when it comes to these kind of things. You have to be going at it from this perspective of, I can be better and therefore I will.
That was great.
I don't think we need to follow that up with anything. I think that was phenomenal, and that's a great way to wrap up our second happy hour.
Yes.
That was incredible.
But but one thing, again, I like the happy hour.
No, he wants to keep drinking.
Well, yes to that.
Yeah. Keep going.
But I like this because I always like to learn from others, ask questions, and I'm like, something like I know. Then you're like, oh, I always do call to actions. Like, damn it, yeah, you're always supposed to do that. So Terrance, we gotta get a call to action off our virtual happy hour show.
So here's a call to action for everyone who's listening. If you liked what we talked about here, we talk about this stuff twice a week on the Investor Mindset, which you can find on every podcasting app, or you can go to theinvestormindset.com. And we've got a great free training series where you can sign up right on the website. That's theinvestormindset.com or theinvestormindset.com/listen if you just want to listen to it on whatever your favorite podcasting app is. So what's yours?
Mine is a totally different direction and less than that. I'm kind of curious what drinks we should drink in the next episode. That was my call to action. Yours is much better for business. Mine's a little more fun here. So
Steve's on a health kick. So
I know.
So yeah, we can bring a different drink. I'm with you on that. No problem. That's easy. The call to action for me, I actually have a couple tough conversations coming up with some people at the end of the month that are, I'm actually flying to Des Moines on Thursday. Have to have some tough conversations there. So I'm going to write out what I think an appropriate response is and practice that, having those difficult conversations.
Yeah.
So I think that's really good feedback and something I've never done, but I like that. So I'm going to pick that up.
So my real call to action, besides you guys got good whiskeys you like, let me and Terrance know, but the real call to action is this is our second happy hour we've been doing. We want to gain some good traction, or hopefully, live on social, Terrance's Instagram, my Facebook page. So if you guys can join us for future episodes live, even if you're on here for a few minutes, if you got questions, email us in beforehand. We do actually want to build into some type of virtual happy hour with some continuity, since a lot of meetups and get-togethers are just frozen right now, and I think they will be like that for many, many months to come, unfortunately. So we do want to build some virtual traction here. So please give us comments, give us feedback, join us live, and send us some questions. Anyways, Terrance, thank you. Steven, thank you. It's always great to catch up with you.
Thanks, awesome, guys. It was super fun.
That was great.